The neon always spoke before it shone. A thin, animal hum rose from the glass tubing and transformer as Clara Alvarez flipped the porcelain switch behind the counter, and she waited for it the way you waited for a pulse when you were afraid it might not be there anymore. Outside, the sign came awake in its familiar order. Blue letters first as the mercury in the argon warmed, then the red outline, then the yellow arrow pointing down at nothing except the open door. It was early June of 1952, the hour when the sun slipped behind the scrub-dark hills west of town and the Mojave exhaled the heat it had been storing all day. Clara stood still with her hands on her apron, watching the light settle into its steady buzz, telling herself that as long as the sign was lit, the road would remember her place on it. The cafe sat just far enough from town that the traffic belonged to her before it belonged to anyone else. On clear days, she could see the steel water tower with the town's name fading in block letters. On most nights, she heard the cars long before she saw them, tires singing on the oiled pavement of Route 66, the sound carrying clean and far in the evening air. She and her husband Mateo had opened the place in 1937, when the road still felt like a promise rather than a habit, when it made sense to believe that motorists would always need coffee at all hours and a door that swung inward. Mateo had built the counter himself from hardwood planks salvaged off a Santa Fe boxcar floor, sealing the wood so thoroughly that 15 years later coffee still beaded and ran instead of soaking in. He wired the neon sign too, working from a mimeograph manual, cursing softly when the transformer sparked. When he died in the winter of 1949, tuberculosis, found too late, as the county death register would later put it, Clara kept the cafe because it was the only way she knew how to keep the days shaped and counted. By 1952, the cafe and the road shared a rhythm. Pre-dawn truckers wanted eggs fried hard and coffee black. Mid-morning families left dusty half-moons on the linoleum tiles ordered from Los Angeles after the war. Traveling salesmen set their hats upside down on the counter, as if they might roll away. Clara knew where to stand to catch the first flash of headlights at the bend by the dry wash, how long she had to rinse a cup before the bell on the door rang. On good nights, cars idled on the gravel shoulder, engines ticking as they cooled, drivers leaning back against fenders to smoke. On thin nights, there was only the neon, the crickets, and the 50-cup urn cycling on and off, breathing to itself. The first sign of change arrived without a rumor. It came as a man with a clipboard who ordered apple pie and didn't touch it. He sat straight backed at the counter, tie loosened just enough to suggest fatigue, and asked Clara who owned the land behind the cafe. When she told him it was leased month to month from the railroad, he nodded and wrote. He asked about survey crews. She said there were always men with stakes somewhere past the wash. He paid an exact change, left the pie untouched, and drove off in a dark sedan that raised a cloud of dust she could taste, just the sort of visit later summarized in a state highway department field notebook. After that, the crews came for real. Flatbeds with ladders and cable, graders and bulldozers that scraped at the earth as if the ground itself had done something wrong. They worked during the day while Clara slept, and slept while she worked, so their presence was felt more as vibration than sight. Sometimes a man came in at dawn with grit in his eyes and boots heavy with dust, asking for coffee strong enough to hold a spoon. They talked about grades and bridge spans, about a new limited-access highway the papers said Washington would help pay for, a road you could cross the state on without slowing for towns. Clara listened, learning the words the way you learned the names of approaching storms. They called it an interstate road, as if the word explained itself. An artery, one man said, a highway that wouldn't stop for anyone who stood beside it. Clara learned it would run north of town, closer to the river where the curves could be engineered away. It would not pass her cafe. It would not pass most of the things that made the town a town. It would draw a clean line through the desert and leave behind the habits that had grown along the old road like lichen on stone, the sort of change editorialized about in small dailies long before any law made it official. Her son Luis was 16 that summer, tall and thin, with Mateo's hands and Clara's stubborn mouth. He worked the late shift, wiped tables, ran out to the single gravity feed pump when someone needed gas. He loved the road with an uncomplicated devotion, the way people arrived from somewhere else and left again, the way stories could remain unfinished. The talk of the new highway filled him with a restless excitement. "They say it'll be fast," he told her one night as they closed, the neon buzzing outside, chairs upturned on the tables. "They say trucks won't have to slow down for towns anymore." "And where will they stop?" Clara asked, counting the register. Luis shrugged. "They won't." She thought of the counter Mateo had built to be leaned on, of the pie rack and the hook by the door where hats always hung. She imagined a road with no reason to pull over. The register snapped shut louder than she meant it to. As summer deepened, the cars came less often. Not enough to name it outright, but enough that Clara listened harder for tires and checked the clock more often. The crews ate in town now, at a place advertising fast service. Still, she kept the neon lit, even when an hour passed without a car, even when the electric bill arrived thick with numbers she didn't like. The light was a promise, and she didn't know how to break it. In August, a family from Illinois stopped near midnight. Clara wrapped their sandwiches in wax paper and watched the father stand under the sign, smoking, studying it as if it were something he wanted to remember. He said they were taking the old road because you could see things that way. When they left, the neon buzzed on, steady and patient. The first person to suggest she turn it off was the banker, Harold Whitcomb. He spoke gently, coffee cooling between his hands. "Electricity cost money," he said. "People went where the road went." Clara nodded and said nothing. After he left, she stood at the switch and didn't touch it. By September, the machines were tearing long scars in the desert, raw earth exposed to the sun. Dust settled everywhere, even in the sugar bowls. Luis took a job flagging for the crews, came home bright-eyed, talking about states as if they were neighborhoods. They said the road would be finished in a few years, if appropriations held. They said it was the future. Clara watched him and saw that future pulling at him, already asking for his hands. The nights cooled. Sometimes no one came at all. Once, a man sat in his car beneath the neon for a long time before coming in. He ate his pie slowly and said his wife used to like stopping here. "The coffee tasted like someone cared," he said. After he left, Clara turned the sign off for the first time, just to see. The darkness made her chest tighten. She turned it back on and waited for her hands to stop shaking. Winter came, and then notices, and then detours tacked up at the post office. The cafe began to feel like a place waiting for something that wasn't coming. Clara baked fewer pies, brewed smaller pots. Luis talked about leaving. In the spring of 1953, the new highway took a shape you could see from a low rise. Pale concrete stretching away with a confidence that felt almost rude, the sort of progress photographed for agency reports. The old road still carried cars, but they seemed surprised to find anything at all. One April night, a storm rolled in hard and sudden. The road was empty, the neon flickered and steadied, and headlights appeared through the rain as if summoned. A young woman came in shaking, used the phone, drank soup, waited out the storm. She said she'd taken the old road because she liked towns. When she left, she hugged Clara like family. After that, the weight of the nights grew heavier. The decision came quietly on a Tuesday in June, a year after the man with the clipboard hadn't eaten his pie. At midnight, the cafe empty, the road silent, Clara turned the sign off and left it off. She stayed open for a while longer, by day. By August, there was a for sale sign in the window. In September, Luis left for California. On the last night, Clara cleaned until the place smelled of soap, coffee, and varnish. She locked the door and walked home under a sky full of stars, the new road humming faintly in the distance. Years later, when the cafe was only a shell and the sign a rusted frame, people still talked about it. They said there had been a light out there once, a place that stayed on. And they said it the way you spoke of something you could almost hear again if you stood still long enough, listening to a road remembering itself. If this story stayed with you, please consider liking the video. It helps these quiet, often overlooked stories reach more people who value them. Subscribe to Ordinary Lives, Extraordinary Times to remain connected to stories of everyday people who lived through moments that shaped history. Each life mattered. Each story deserves to be remembered. We'd also like to hear from you. Share in the comments where you're watching from. Our audience spans countries, generations, and experiences, all joined by a shared respect for history and the lives within it. Thank you for watching, and thank you for helping keep these stories alive.